and let me tell you something, brother.
It's Talk Wrestling Live with Felix The Cat Katlovski
and Gemini Joe.
It doesn't matter what your name is.
We heard rumbling. No, we heard rumors. Homicide. Conan. 5150 at LAX.
Listen live on Mondays at 4 p.m. on NorthCoastUnderground.com.
and follow us on Twitter at TWL 24/7.
I'm in no mood for your wisecrack. Let's get it on.
Hey wrestling fans, this is Felix The Cat Katlovski, and you're listening to Talk Wrestling Live. Let's get this show started with the Fear After Dark report, where we talk about everything about Impact Wrestling that happened last week on March 8th. So let's get kicking with Fear After Dark. Are you scared? It's time for Fear After Dark.
I thought this was fun and games.
Fear is a funny thing.
En cero, miedo.
Fear was meant for the art of survival. I am the new beginning.
Because we are for Ohio. By Ohio. Because we are Ohio versus everything.
I'm better than every single one in that locker room. Tessa Blanchard is undeniable.
I'm not a man. I'm a machine.
Hey everybody, this is Felix The Cat Katlovski, and this is Fear After Dark. So let's get kicking with the report from Impact Wrestling from March 8th, the full recap. We started out with Rich Swann, the X Division champion, and he was going up against Ethan Page. So Rich Swann, he ended up defeating Ethan Page in a pretty well-balanced match. But after that match, you had OVE, and they came out with Sami Callihan, and there was a lot of fans chanting OVE sucks in that Las Vegas crowd. But Sami Callihan, he had a major announcement to make, and during that announcement on that night, he wanted to announce that Rich Swann would finally be joining OVE. Now, Callihan brought up how in the previous week before that, when they were still at the hospital, that Rich Swann was sent to the hospital by Sami Callihan, and Callihan said that he did it because he loved him, so that was kind of strange. But when they were at the hospital, Rich Swann, he admitted that Callihan was indeed family. So even after he was put into the hospital by Sami Callihan, Rich Swann's still saying that Callahan's family right here. So the fans in Las Vegas, they didn't want to see Rich Swann join OVE, so Callihan called them sheep. And now Callihan wants Rich Swann to put that OVE shirt on, but Rich Swann put the shirt on, and then it looked like they were all going to be celebrating, and then you had Rich Swann, out of nowhere, he just super kicked Sami Callihan, and then he attacked the Christ brothers from OVE, Dave and Jay Christ. Rich Swann, he left the ring, and he tore that OVE shirt apart, and I guess Rich Swann just isn't ready to join OVE just yet. So then we were brought backstage, and LAX was there with Conan. Now, Santana, he wanted to get an update from Conan about LAX getting that possible rematch against the Lucha Bros, and Conan, he started making fun of Santana and Ortiz because they previously lost to the Lucha Bros, and just before that, you had Santana and Ortiz, they were mocking Pentagon and Phoenix on wanting to take another whooping. Conan, he was saying the same thing about LAX. Since they lost, did they really want to get whooped? So Ortiz and Santana wanted to save the jokes for another time because they wanted that rematch, but they needed to be patient and let Conan do his job. He gave LAX an assignment to watch the Lucha Bros match against the Rascals and to take notes. That's Conan's suggestion for LAX. And then we saw a replay from the previous week where Johnny Impact, he looked like he really suffered a neck injury, and Brian Cage, he lost a lot of blood in their match against Killer Kross and Moose. They were tag teaming. It was Johnny Impact and Brian Cage. Now, it was Killer Kross who put Brian Cage in that jacket submission hold, and instead of reversing or tapping out, you had Brian Cage, he just passed out. So it was probably from a lot of blood loss, but I mean, it's a submission move. It takes a lot of oxygen out of you. Now, both Brian Cage and Johnny Impact, they would later be taken to the hospital, both of them. And then we saw footage from moments after their match where Brian Cage, he was just about to be sent to that hospital after that match took place, but there was an investigative reporter who showed up, and the doctor, who was part of Impact Wrestling, he told that investigative reporter to leave. But the investigative reporter, he didn't leave, and he said that he would be the one asking the questions here. So the investigative reporter, he confronted Brian Cage about, once again, not being able to get the job done. And Brian Cage, he was surprised that this investigative reporter was even backstage in the first place, bothering him at a time like this. I mean, he's bleeding so much blood, you can see it on his face. He's busted open. He just passed out to that submission move in his match, and you have this investigative reporter. I just thought it was funny because it's almost like professional sports where you have an athlete being interviewed about an injury or about a certain event that happened right after the game. So that was kind of like what happened with this investigative reporter. It's just kind of a funny mix for pro wrestling. So that investigative reporter, he was out there to ask Brian Cage, kind of pester him why he couldn't get the job done. And Brian Cage, he was just shocked that the guy was bothering him backstage at a time like this. And that's when the referees, they were backstage and they forced the investigative reporter to leave. And then it was time for Ace Austin versus Jake Atlas. And this was Ace Austin's debut match at Impact Wrestling. And Ace Austin came out to the ring carrying an Ace of Spades playing card, and he even managed to get his win during his debut match. So that's an impressive win for Ace Austin. Now, the investigative reporter, he was doing a story from his news studio, and he had Taya Valkyrie and Johnny Impact joining him from another location. And the investigative reporter asked Johnny Impact whether he felt that he let Brian Cage down. Johnny Impact didn't really see it that way. I mean, he mentioned that injuries happen. We're just supposed to accept that. Then we had Reno Scum. They were backstage, and they were talking about how it took them 2 years to finally get back in Impact Wrestling. They thought Fallah Bahh and KM got a fluke victory over them the week before, but because KM and Fallah Bahh didn't watch their own backs, they got a surprise attack from Reno Scum after that match. So then we had Alicia Edwards, that's Eddie Edwards' wife, and she thanked Impact Wrestling for giving her the opportunity to wrestle. But now that her contract is expiring, she's considering what's next in her future. So while she enjoys coming to the ring and entertaining the fans, she still thinks that she should stay home and think about starting a family. But that's when the Desi Hit Squad, they showed up and commended Alicia on becoming a housewife, and that was really disrespectful because it took a really derogatory turn right there. Now, Alicia, she wasn't happy to hear that message from the Desi Hit Squad, so she slapped Gama Singh in the face. And Eddie Edwards, he came out to help his wife, but he got outnumbered by the Desi Hit Squad. And that's when Eli Drake showed up, and he helped Eddie Edwards and Alicia, delivering that gravy train and cornering Gama Singh in the turnbuckle. So now you have Eddie Edwards. He has to be wondering whether Eli Drake is really his friend or if he's still doing this for some other reason to benefit himself. So that investigative reporter, he was backstage again with Brian Cage, and this time it was after Cage had already recovered. So Brian Cage has a clear mind at this point. He can think about what he wants to say, and he can formulate his story on what he thought about Johnny Impact. So he's not like busted open anymore. And Brian Cage, he was not happy to see that reporter. He was still calling that reporter a troll for sneaking backstage and asking him questions while he was bleeding profusely. Now, while Cage didn't have much to say to the reporter, we did see how Johnny Impact was willing to answer all the questions. And I wonder whether Brian Cage still feels that Johnny Impact let Brian Cage down, or the opposite. So who knows if they are on the same page, because Brian Cage told the reporter to get out. So he was still not willing to answer questions, even though it had been about a week since his loss. Now we saw Eddie Edwards, he was arguing with Alicia, and I guess he just doesn't seem to want her to stay home. But she hasn't really made any official plans yet. She was just trying to decide on what she should do. She was just considering it, since her contract is expiring and she is not certain whether she wants to return. So while they were arguing, you had Eli Drake show up, and Eddie Edwards, he thanked Eli Drake for watching his back and saving Alicia from the Desi Hit Squad. Now, Eli said that he didn't make the save to be the good guy or to do what's right. He's just really interested in tag teaming with Eddie Edwards. But Eddie still didn't seem interested in that idea. And that's when Alicia called Eddie stubborn. Alicia said that she's seen Eddie tag with many different people, but she believes there's some kind of chemistry between Eddie Edwards and Eli Drake if they form a tag team. So then Alicia mentioned that Eli Drake is the only one Eddie has left, because Eli Drake, he might be the only person willing to team with Eddie Edwards. And she doesn't know why, because sometimes she doesn't even know whether she's with Team Eddie. And this is his own wife speaking. This is Alicia Edwards. So if she doesn't even want to be on his team some of the time, she doesn't even know why anybody else would be. So it sounds like a really complicated relationship between Alicia and Eddie Edwards right there. And Alicia took off, but Eli offered to team with Eddie Edwards in a match against the Desi Hit Squad for next week on Impact Wrestling, and that's going to be this week. So if it works out, we could see this team continuing to go strong, but if it doesn't, we won't see them teaming anymore. And Eddie Edwards, he accepted that offer to team with Eli Drake. We then learned that Impact Wrestling, they're going back to Windsor, Ontario, Canada, just above Detroit, Michigan, for their next set of Impact tapings for March 22nd and March 23rd. And it looks like BCW, Border City Wrestling, they will be involved. So Moose and Killer Kross, they were being interviewed by Melissa Santos, and they were feeling great after taking Johnny Impact and Brian Cage out. So Killer Kross sent a message to Johnny Impact, and that if Johnny Impact wouldn't give him a title shot when he returns to Impact, that he would send him back to the hospital. So Moose then jumped into the conversation, calling Johnny Impact Johnny Neckbrace, and Moose was ready to celebrate at the Greatest Steakhouse in Las Vegas. And he was trying to flirt with Melissa Santos to invite her to the meal, but she just kind of blew him off. She was not interested in that at all. So the Rascals, they were backstage in their circle, and Zach Wentz was freaking out about a nightmare that he was having, but Trey Miguel was telling him how it wasn't real, and he said something about a robot, but Zach Wentz said it was a real bear. So Desmond joined them and started to strategize, telling the Rascals to go for the masks, to take their powers, and then to get the wins. So Desmond said step 1 was complete when he picked up that Kikitaro mask, and Zach Wentz, he was freaking out because he thought that Kikitaro's mask was actually a face, and it was clearly a mask. So Desmond assured him that it was just a mask, and he had a mask for Zach Wentz as well. But Zach didn't want that mask because he wanted to impress the ladies, and he thought it would cover his face if he wore that mask. He wants to show off his looks, and if he's wearing that mask, no one sees what he looks like under that. So Zach Wentz, he's more focused on impressing the ladies. And Trey Miguel, he was just laughing about how Moose was trying to impress Melissa Santos while Moose was wearing that pink jacket. And since they didn't need the masks anymore, they decided that they'd give back the masks, and Zach Wentz still called it a face. So they decided they would just be themselves. Then we had that Dark War match where Su Yung and Allie, they teamed up against Kiera Hogan, Jordan Grace, and Rosemary. Now, if Su Young's team wins, she gets Rosemary's soul. But if Rosemary's team wins, they get Allie back. So James Mitchell, he accompanied Su Young's team, and they had their undead maid of honor joining them. Now, the lights, they were shining red for the entire match. Other than that, it seemed like a pretty normal 6-person tag match. And at one point, we saw Su Yung, she hit that panic switch, while Allie hit the code breaker. But Rosemary was behind her. And just when Su Yung went for the mist, she ended up spitting that mist on her own partner, the undead bridemaid of honor. And this allowed Rosemary to spear the undead bridemaid, and that's when Rosemary pinned her for the win. So I guess the Shadows get to take Allie back, and Rosemary put some kind of rope collar thing around Allie's neck as she dragged her away, and you could tell Allie wanted to get back with Su Yung. I mean, she's not in control here, she's being dragged away over here, and she wants to be back to her master, Su Yung. So we saw the Disco Inferno, and he was talking with Conan backstage. You had Disco, he was still looking for Don Callis to figure out what his job is in Impact Wrestling exactly. And Conan said that since Disco is from the mean streets of Marietta, Georgia, that he should confront Callis because Conan said that Callis wanted to make Disco Inferno the new mascot of Impact Wrestling. So Conan showed Disco Inferno what he claimed was Don Callis' office, and that's when Disco Inferno, he walked in and he thought he saw some bald guy that made him think it was Don Callis. So when Disco Inferno, when he did go into that office to confront Don Callis, it turned out to be Killer Kross. And Killer Kross was not happy that he was being interrupted by Disco Inferno. You could hear it from outside of the door. They were just screaming, and it was a brawl over there. I mean, Disco Inferno probably got whooped. So then you had Disco Inferno, he kept walking into the wrong people. I guess he took a really hard hit from Killer Kross, and he thought he heard Vince Russo or somebody that had claimed that they'd been writing TV for Vince McMahon back in the day, but it turned out to be somebody else. And then Disco Inferno, he thought he saw his buddy, TNA founder Jeff Jarrett, sporting those white pants after Labor Day, but it turned out to be a doctor for Impact Wrestling, and Disco Inferno, he just started trash-talking this doctor for looking like an idiot, but I think if it was Jeff Jarrett, I don't think Disco Inferno would have made fun of his clothes. Then you had Disco Inferno, he thought he saw the Young Bucks and Cody Rhodes from AEW, All Elite Wrestling, and Disco even name-dropped AEW asking if they had any job openings. And he wanted to be a vice president too, but it turned out to be some random people after all. So it wasn't Cody Rhodes and it wasn't the Young Bucks, it was just, I guess, some kind of lookalikes. And Disco Inferno finally thought he saw Impact Wrestling Vice President Scott D'Amore, but he wasn't sure it was him, so he grabbed him by the face, and Scott was wondering why Disco was touching him. So while Disco was talking about finding Don Callis, Scott D'Amore was wondering if Disco Inferno ever watches Impact Wrestling, because Don Callis, he's not that hard to find at Impact Wrestling. I mean, he's always on commentary. So Disco, he seemed surprised to learn all about all this, and then he thought Callis might want Disco Inferno to join him on the commentary team. Now, Scott D'Amore, he knew that was not the case, and that didn't stop Disco Inferno from even trying to find out. So Disco, he finally joins Don Callis on the commentary team, and Don Callis was wondering where he's been. I mean, this isn't his first day on the job, though he keeps on claiming. I mean, this guy, he got locked out of the building after he couldn't take directions, and everybody's saying, yeah, you're a week late, and now he's even later now. So Disco Inferno, he was telling Callis to stop hiring people who fall asleep backstage at production meetings, and Josh Matthews was welcoming Scarlett Bordeaux while Disco Inferno remained on the commentary booth. And Disco and Don Callis, they were going crazy over Scarlett's outfit. And Josh Matthews, he just kind of stuck to business, asking Scarlett about her talent search, where she gave the fans and wrestlers around the world an opportunity to get Scarlett Bordeaux to represent them. But in the end, you had Scarlett, she chose to represent herself, and I can't blame her. Now, Scarlett didn't think anybody who sent in a video could stay focused to win a championship. So Scarlett was the obvious choice. I mean, she chose herself for a reason right there. And Josh Matthews, he asked Scarlett Bordeaux, who had the least potential. She responded that it was Disco Inferno. I mean, Scarlett Bordeaux, she looked at all these teams, she looked at all these wrestlers, and she said that Disco Inferno had the least potential in her representing him. So she made fun of how Disco Inferno was forced to wear that turkey suit when his team lost during that Thanksgiving episode of Impact Wrestling, the Gravy Train Turkey Trot episode. And Scarlett Bordeaux, she was still laughing at Disco and at his expense, and now Disco Inferno showed up to the ring. Now there was lots of humiliating gobble gobble turkey chants from the crowd being directed towards Disco Inferno. Now Disco asked what was wrong with Scarlett Bordeaux. I mean, he was surprised that she wanted to wrestle after she was only showing off her looks for about 6 months. But now she wants to wrestle. And Disco Inferno says that she's going to suck because when she starts wrestling, he tells her that she knows this too, that she's going to suck when she starts wrestling also. And Disco Inferno then verbally attacks the state of women's wrestling and says it hasn't been good, except when they had bra and panties matches. Now, he's taking a really sexist approach, but that's kind of what the Attitude Era was back in the 90s, in women's wrestling anyway. And Disco Inferno says that since Impact Wrestling doesn't have bra and panties matches, that there's no reason they should even wrestle. So Disco Inferno really has a negative view on women's wrestling, and it kind of sounds like a sexist position, but he was on the committee for WCW, and he has years of experience, so you have to take his word for something. At the same time, you're allowed to disagree with what he's saying. Now, Don Callis, he called Disco Inferno an idiot for saying that about women's wrestling and saying that Scarlett Bordeaux would suck when she wrestles. Now, Scarlett Bordeaux, she brought up how men like Disco Inferno have been telling Scarlett Bordeaux her whole life how to talk, how to act, how to dress, and then Disco Inferno thought that Scarlett Bordeaux was flirting with him. But Scarlett ended up slapping Disco Inferno in the face, and Scarlett confronted Disco for thinking that she couldn't wrestle, because Disco is bigger than her, stronger than her, and Disco seemed to agree to each of those comments. But Scarlett thought that she could take Disco Inferno on. So Disco, he was trying to bring her back to his world, telling her that the women's revolution was causing Scarlett to act illogically. And Disco told Scarlett Bordeaux to take the Desi Hit Squad's advice and to go home and do the laundry and cook. And then if she thought that she could still take Disco, that it wouldn't be hard to find him. So it sounded like Disco Inferno accepted the challenge. And Scarlett said that Disco might just think she's a woman, but next time she sees him at Impact Wrestling, she's going to make him her property, and not in a good way. And that's when Disco Inferno walked off. Now, we saw Rosemary dragging away Allie outside. We remember that Dark War match that Team Soo-Young lost, and this allowed Allie to now be kind of property of Rosemary. So Rosemary and Kiera Hogan, as well as Jordan Grace, they were told to go home by Rosemary, and Kiera wanted to take Allie too, but Rosemary let Kiera know that was not Allie, but that's what Allie has become. And Kiera said that she's not leaving without Allie, and Rosemary said for her, it is the end, so it is her time to leave. And now it's time for the main event, where the Rascals took on the Lucha Bros. And this was a huge opportunity for the Rascals. I mean, if they were able to beat the Impact Tag Team Champions, Pentagon and Phoenix from the Lucha Bros, then Desmond and Phoenix, they began the match, and at one point the Lucha Bros were double teaming on Desmond, and Desmond began biting Pentagon's finger, but this caused Phoenix to super kick Desmond, and Desmond fought off the Lucha Bros, and then he slid under Phoenix and kicked him into Pentagon, causing a distraction and some miscommunication for the Lucha Bros. And that's when Desmond Xavier, he tagged in Zach Wentz, who was facing off with Phoenix. And Wentz went at it at both Lucha Bros, and at one point he used an uppercut from the outside of the ring, nailing Phoenix on the top of the turnbuckle. And then there was a crazy moment in this match when Zach Wentz, he boosted Desmond Xavier up over the turnbuckle on the outside of the ring, and Desmond, he just went flying, flipping over the turnbuckle and nailing both Pentagon and Phoenix. That looked pretty innovative, and I don't think that we have ever seen that move done before in wrestling. And Zach Wentz, he also hit a swanton, and Desmond Xavier also hit another high-risk move, but Phoenix, he did make the save, and that's when Zach Wentz went for a pin. Now, eventually, the Lucha Bros, they did take control of the match, and that's when Phoenix, he grabbed Desmond Xavier, and Pentagon, he super kicked Desmond, and Phoenix and Pentagon, they went for this tag team maneuver on Zach Wentz, and that's when Pentagon, he closed that match out with a Pentagon driver on Zach Wentz, while Phoenix, he went flying through the ropes to cut Desmond Xavier from making the save, and that's how the Lucha Bros got the win over the Rascals. And after that match, we had Conan, he was again backstage, this time with the Lucha Bros. He was congratulating them over their win against the Rascals, and the Lucha Bros asked Conan to tell LAX not to mess with their masks. Conan wasn't sure what the Lucha Bros were expecting when they put their hands in LAX's faces with that disrespectful hand gesture. You could tell there was beef with these two teams, and Conan didn't want any of this. He didn't want this beef, because they're both family to him. He wanted to fix the problem, but Conan let the Lucha Bros know that they wanted a rematch. So the Lucha Bros refused, saying that it was too soon. But Conan reminded the Lucha Bros who they were dealing with. So when he sees them again, he wants the Lucha Bros to pick a date, and the Lucha Bros were not happy that Conan was giving them orders. So that was the Fear After Dark report, and when we come back, we'll be talking more about Impact Wrestling and what's to come with the Lights Out report.
Ride the winds, flying far and soaring like a hawk.
Run a marathon with the endurance of a tiger.
Swim across the ocean like a dolphin.
Beast Energy X. Do you have it in you?
Buy Beast Energy X at all Waffle Max locations and unleash the beast in you.
Join the Beast Energy X fan club and get free perks. Sign up by following us on Twitter at Beast Energy X.
Welcome back to Talk Wrestling Live.
Follow us on Twitter at TWL 24/7.
I'm not finished with you!
And now, let's get back to the show. Everybody, welcome back to Talk Wrestling Live. This is Felix The Cat Katlovski, and we're just about to start the Lights Out report, where we tell you what's coming soon to Impact Wrestling.
Hello, ladies.
Shut up, 5. A 10 is talking.
I'm surprised you're containing yourself. It's like looking at a work of art, Josh. Scarlett Bordeaux has arrived on Impact Wrestling. Oh my God.
Hey, tell them to cover up. I will not be hot-shamed.
Talk about making an impact.
Make wrestling sexy again.
Scarlett Bordeaux has arrived. And now she's leaving, and it's, oh Lord.
Turn the lights down low, because it's time for Impact Lights Out.
Hey everybody, this is Felix The Cat Katlovski, and now it's time for Lights Out. Matches for this week's Impact Wrestling episode on Friday, March 15th. It's going to be Tessa Blanchard taking on Jordynne Grace, and the winner will be able to call themselves the #1 contender for Taya Valkyrie's Impact Wrestling Knockouts Championship. Then we also have Eli Drake and Eddie Edwards. They're finally going to be tag teaming, and we'll see what kind of a tag team they make, because we've seen these two, they've had issues in the past. You always have Eli Drake telling Eddie Edwards not to use that kendo stick, but Eddie Edwards, he finally outsmarted Eli Drake, and he didn't even use the kendo stick. That's how Eddie Edwards picked up that win over Eli Drake back then. Eli Drake ended up saying that they both won, so now they want to be a tag team, and we'll be able to see their test run as a tag team when they take on the Desi Hit Squad this week on Impact Wrestling. We also have Sami Callihan and OVE, that's Dave and Jake Chris, the Chris brothers. They're going to be taking on Tommy Dreamer, Rich Swann, and Willie Mack. So that's a 6-man tag right there. Then we also have the Disco Inferno, Glenn Gilberti. He's going to be presenting his exhibition skills. Now, I don't know what that means, but I do know that he's causing some beef between himself and Scarlett Bordeaux. It should end up in a match between these two, but I guess Glenn Gilberti still has a little bit more gloating to do, trying to show off his exhibition skills, practice for his upcoming match. But he's really taking a negative position on women's wrestling, and he cares more for the bra and panties matches that we used to see in the Attitude Era during the 90s. But lately, women's wrestling, it really has been seeing a spark in its evolution, and they've been having a revolution, not just in the WWE, but in women's wrestling everywhere. In Impact Wrestling, it's been there for a long time now. Now we're finally going to see Scarlett Bordeaux. She believes that she could take on the men, and it's going to start with Glenn Gilberti. I think down the line we're going to see these two wrestle each other, but that does it for your Lights Out report on Impact Wrestling, where we have prepared you for everything that's coming soon to Impact Wrestling on the March 15th episode of Impact Wrestling on the Pursuit channel and Twitch. So if you don't get the Pursuit channel, you can always watch it on Twitch, and you can watch it for free. Now, tonight, if you're listening live, 6 p.m., you can watch Impact Wrestling, the replay from last week that I recapped during Fear After Dark. You can watch that on Twitch for free at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. And you can also watch it on the Global Wrestling Network app, where they'll be showing it tomorrow on Tuesday on that same app. So if you don't get a chance to watch it on Twitch, I'm not sure if they're archiving the replays, but if you don't get a chance, you can watch it on the GWN app, and I don't think you need a subscription for that, at least for the replay. For other parts of their programming, you do need a subscription for the GWN app. I believe it's like $7.99 a month, so if you want, check that out. This has been Talk Wrestling Live on NorthCoastUnderground.com, where the Underground starts with you.
You've been listening to Talk Wrestling Live. Listen live on Mondays at 4 p.m. on NorthCoastUnderground.com.
And follow us on Twitter at TWL 24/7.
Goodbye, and good night, bad. Rest in